The bar was alive with the hum of trade, the clinking of metal cups, and the guttural laughter of beings. The air smelled of oil, spice, and the metallic tang of weapons that had been drawn too many times. In the heart of Scarifor's midnight market, the Howling Wolf Tavern was a melting pot of whispers, of deals made in the dark, and of stories that grew wilder with each retelling. And tonight, they were speaking about him. "I swear," the Tharkan mercenary hissed, his scaled fingers gripping a dented mug. His voice was like gravel dragged over steel. The human, he was unarmed, but he took down 3 Dragon enforcers in under 10 seconds. A Vortilli trader, his gelatinous form shifting with nervous energy, flicked a tendril dismissively. "Bah, another tall tale. You expect me to believe a creature with brittle bones and no exoskeleton outmaneuvered Dragon muscle?" The Tharkan's eyes flared. "I saw it. They had him cornered. And then—" He hesitated as if the memory itself unsettled him. He used the environment, a metal tray, a loose power conduit, and one of those disposable, what do humans call them, zip ties. The Dragon across the table, easily twice the size of the Tharkan, let out a deep. "Sounds like a bedtime story. I don't care how resourceful they are. Humans are weak." Then the door slid open. The conversation died instantly as if the very air had thickened. The Howling Wolf was no stranger to newcomers, but something about this moment sent a ripple of unease through the room. He stepped inside, neither hurried nor hesitant, moving like a man who had walked into countless rooms just like this and never once felt the need to check over his shoulder. Jace Hayes was unremarkable in almost every way. Average height, lean but not imposing, a jumpsuit that had seen better days, scuffed boots, and a toolkit slung at his hip. His brown hair was messy like he hadn't cared enough to fix it, but it was his eyes that made the room uneasy. Aphelion Broker shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Dragon, who had been boasting just moments before, suddenly found his drink far more interesting. Even the Tharkan, the one telling the story, stiffened, because now the story was standing in front of him. Jace's gaze swept the room, scanning faces, noting who looked away and who held his stare a second too long. Then, as if unimpressed, he strode forward, straight to the bar, and lifted a hand in a casual, universal signal to the bartender. "What'll it be?" the bartender asked, his chitinous fingers twitching ever so slightly. Jace tilted his head, considering. "Something strong," he said, voice mild. "Got anything local?" The bartender blinked. For a fraction of a second, everyone had expected something else. A fight, a challenge, a confirmation of the terrifying legend whispered through the black markets. Instead, he just wanted a drink. The tension in the room almost eased. Almost. From the corner of the tavern, a voice rumbled, deep and amused. "I thought you were taller." Jace didn't turn immediately. He picked up his drink, took a slow sip, then finally turned his head towards the speaker. A Crax officer, Targan Craxhar. A high-ranking enforcer for the Crax Dominion. A veteran of a dozen planetary suppressions, the kind of alien whose presence alone could clear a room. And Jace Hayes was staring right at him. "Funny," Jace said, his voice even, unreadable. He set his drink down. "I thought you'd be smarter." Craxhar's mandibles clicked once, slowly. His red eyes gleamed in the dim light. "That's a dangerous tone." "Human." Jace smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you're really going to hate the rest of this conversation." For a second, just a second, the Crax hesitated. Because that was the thing about humans. They didn't look dangerous. They didn't act like conquerors, or warriors, or monsters. They just kept surviving, twisting the rules, making the impossible seem inevitable. And at that moment, Craxhar had the strangest feeling that this wasn't just a man standing in front of him. Craxhar didn't get the chance to respond. The alarms blared, a sharp, grating sound that sent the entire tavern into a frenzy. Conversations died, chairs scraped against the floor, and the once lively bar turned into a hive of nervous energy. Patrons reached for concealed weapons, others scanned the exits, and a few bolted immediately, knowing that when Dominion security locked down an area, someone was about to disappear. Jace didn't move. He simply finished his drink, exhaled like a man who had been waiting for this exact moment, and then turned to the bartender. "Well," he said, voice dry. "That's unfortunate." Craxhar stood abruptly, his massive frame casting a long shadow over Jace. His mandibles twitched in amusement. "You knew." Jace turned his head just slightly, his expression unreadable. "What can I say? I have great timing. Outside, heavy boots pounded against the metal ground. The hiss of plasma rifles charging up sent shivers through the crowd. Dominion troopers, a full squad. The Dragon from earlier, the one who had dismissed the stories, now looked at Jace with something far closer to unease. Now? Now, he just wanted to be somewhere else. Kraxhar's eyes narrowed. They're not here for me, are they? Jace offered a small, almost apologetic shrug. Guess not. Then he moved. Fast, one fluid motion. Like a dancer who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, the Krax roared in surprise, stumbling back, and in that half-second window, Jace's right hand went for his toolkit, for a small metal sphere the size of a coin. He flicked it forward. It hit the ground, beeped once, and then detonated into a shockwave of electromagnetic interference. The lights cut out. The bar was swallowed in instant darkness, and the alarms fizzled into silence. Then came chaos. Someone fired a plasma bolt into the ceiling, sending sparks raining down like a meteor shower. The Dominion troopers outside hesitated, confused by the sudden power loss, and that was all the time Jace needed. A voice cut through the dark, sharp and unmistakably familiar. Jace, move! Rinka. He didn't need to be told twice. In the flickering emergency glow, he saw her, a Velzari warrior, sleek and deadly, already in motion. She had been waiting for him to make the first move, and now she was cutting through the panicked crowd like a shadow, 2 plasma daggers glowing in her hands. Jace vaulted over the bar, grabbing a metal serving tray midair and hurling it behind him. He counterattacked enough to make sure Jace had one less problem to deal with. He hit the ground, rolling up just as Rinka reached him, her violet eyes flashing. You took your damn time, she muttered. Had to make an entrance, he shot back. She didn't argue. The Dominion troopers were pushing into the bar now, warning, for now. But they wouldn't stay merciful for long. Jace grabbed a bottle from the counter, smashed the top against the edge, and flung it at the nearest trooper. How many? Rinka asked, already scanning for an escape. Jace glanced up at the rafters. Enough to ruin my week. Rinka exhaled, then pulled a small, rectangular device from her belt. She flicked it open, revealing a holographic interface. We're going loud, then, she muttered. Jace groaned. We always go loud. She pressed a button. A controlled detonation, but it turned the structural integrity of the howling wolf into a questionable topic at best. Dust and debris choked the air. The troopers recoiled, shields flaring as they were pelted with shrapnel, and Jace and Rinka ran. They dove through the smoking hole, hitting the ground hard outside. Scarafor's underbelly stretching out before them, narrow alleys, neon-lit market stalls, towering cargo crates stacked like a maze. Behind them, the Dominion troopers recovered. Move, 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 one of them barked. Rinka grabbed Jace's wrist, her grip like iron. Follow me. They bolted into the maze, weaving between crates, dodging plasma fire as it hissed past them, scorching the metal walls. An act nearly clipped Jace's shoulder, but he ducked just in time, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. And then, just when he thought they had lost their pursuers, a figure stepped into their path. That is Kraxhar, face still wet with the remnants of the drink Jace had thrown at him, eyes glowing with fury. The Krax officer blocked the alleyway, his massive frame filling the entire space. His mandibles twitched in something that was not a smile but close enough to be unsettling. I changed my mind, Kraxhar growled. I don't think I'll let you run, human. Jace slowed to a stop, catching his breath. He wiped some of the dust from his sleeve and gave a small, thoughtful nod. Then, without warning, he yanked Rinka down just as a cargo crane swung overhead, right where their heads had been a second before. It slammed into Kraxhar instead. The impact was brutal, but more than enough to send the Krax flying sideways, crashing through a nearby stack of metal crates. Jace dusted off his hand, exhaling. Man, I love this place. Rinka gave him a look. You're insane. Jace grinned. And yet, we're still alive. The sound of approaching reinforcements cut the moment short. No time to celebrate, no time to waste. The Dominion wasn't going to stop, not until they had his head on a spike. Jace clenched his jaw. They needed to move. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about getting to Urak 7 and finding out what the Dominion was so desperate to hide. Jace and Rinka ran, their boots slamming against the metal flooring of Skara 4's underbelly. The Dominion troopers were relentless, their shouts growing closer, the charging up a constant hum of impending. Jace's mind was already calculating, mapping out possible escape routes. Skara 4 was a chaotic labyrinth of industrial sprawl, a patchwork of cargo docks, smuggler hideouts, and forgotten maintenance tunnels. If they could get underground and lose themselves in the network of old transit routes beneath the city, they might just have a chance. Rinka's grip tightened on his wrist. "We can't outrun them forever, Hayes." "I don't plan on it," he muttered. Ahead, a freight tram rumbled through the alleyway, heading towards one of the larger shipping yards. Jace's eyes flicked up, calculating the speed, the distance. Then he grabbed Rinka and yanked them both onto a pile of crates just as the tram passed. "Jump!" No hesitation. They leaped together, landing hard on the top of the moving transport. The impact jarred through Jace's body, but he clenched his jaw, rolling into position as the tram shot forward. Behind them, Dominion troopers burst into the alley too late. By the time they realized what had happened, the tram had already carried Jace and Rinka deep into the shipping yard. Jace let out a slow breath, sitting up. "Okay." That was fun. Rinka shot him a glare. "You call that fun? Two call it reckless." He grinned. "Same thing, sometimes." She sighed, shaking her head, but there was no hiding the faint trace of amusement in her eyes. For a moment, they just sat there, catching their breath as the tram hummed along its track. But Jace knew the reprieve wouldn't last. The Dominion wasn't going to give up. He reached into his jacket, pulling out the data spike, a sleek, unassuming device no bigger than his thumb. Inside it were the stolen Kraxhar command codes, the key to getting into Urak 7. "Are you sure about this?" Rinka asked, her voice quieter now. Jace's grip tightened around the spike. "If what's in Urak 7 is what I think it is, we don't have a choice." Her gaze flickered, scanning his face, searching for something. Then she gave a slow nod. "All right, let's get off this rock." Then, the tram began slowing as it neared the central freight terminal, its towering cranes looming overhead, casting long shadows across the docking platforms. Jace and Rinka slipped off the side, keeping low as they moved between rows of cargo containers, avoiding the workers and security patrols. Jace's mind was already running a dozen different scenarios. They needed a ship, something fast, something unregistered, something they could take without drawing too much attention. Then, as if the universe had read his mind, he saw it. A sleek, mid-sized freighter docked just ahead, its engines powered down, waiting for departure. Jace glanced at Rinka. "How do you feel about stealing a ship?" She sighed. "You ask me that like it's the first time." Jace smirked, then crept forward, keeping close to the shadows. The freighter was marked the Valkyrie, and from the look of it, it had been modified, custom shielding, enhanced thrusters, a reinforced hull, smuggler class, no doubt, which meant it was probably locked down tighter than a Dominion vault. Jace reached the main ramp, scanning the entrance. All right, best case scenario. The pilot left the door open. Rinka tilted her head. And worst case? Jace took out his hacking tool, already working on the control panel. They're still inside, and we have to improvise. As if on cue, the ship's external sensors whirred to life. A voice, deep, annoyed, and very much present, crackled over the comms. "Who the hell is touching my ship?" Jace winced. Well, that answers that. The ramp hissed open suddenly, and before either of them could react, a figure stepped out. A man, tall, rugged, armed, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly in the dim light. He didn't look happy. Jace raised his hands in a loose, casual gesture of surrender. "Hey there. Love what you've done with the place. Real sleek." The man's cybernetic eye whirred, scanning them both. "You've got 3 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't shoot you." Jace didn't blink. "Because we're about to make you very rich." There was a pause, a flicker of interest. Jace pressed forward. "We need a ship. You need credits. And if you take us where we need to go, you'll be compensated very, very generously." The man's fingers tapped against his holster, considering. His cybernetic eye flicked to Rinka, then back to Jace. Then he smirked. "I don't work for free, Hayes." Jace's stomach dropped. Rinka tensed. "You know him?" Jace groaned, rubbing a hand down his face. "Of course, it's you." The pilot grinned. "Damn right, it is. And it just so happens I love getting paid for saving your ass. Jace sighed. Rinka, meet Dax Quinn, the best damn smuggler in the galaxy. Also, the biggest pain in my ass. Dax chuckled. Don't be so dramatic. Now, are we talking about GA Simple Cargo Run? Or should I be worried? Jace exhaled. We're going to Urak 7. The humor disappeared from Dax's face instantly. His expression darkened. Dax looked between them, weighing his options, then let out a long, slow breath. All right, get inside before I change my mind. Jace and Rinka exchanged a glance, then moved quickly, following him up the ramp. The ship sealed shut behind them, and just like that, they were committed. Urak 7 awaited, and what they were about to uncover would change everything. The Valkyrie cut through the void, streaking toward Urak 7 under the cover of its stealth systems. The once distant world now loomed large in the viewport, its surface a cold, metallic wasteland of towering spires and subterranean complexes, a fortress world built not for comfort but for control. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Jace stood behind Dax, arms crossed, watching as the smuggler guided them through the outer perimeter. Beside him, Rinka monitored the sensor readouts, eyes sharp. All right, haze, Dax muttered, flicking a switch that dimmed the control panels to silent running mode. I got us past the long-range scanners, but if they decide to eyeball us up close, this little ghost routine won't hold. Jace nodded, then pulled up the stolen command codes on his datapad. The entire mission hinged on this. If Kraxhar had changed security protocols after their little stunt on Skara 4, they were about to fly straight into a trap. Rinka exhaled. Time to see if this was worth taking. Dax's fingers danced over the console, transmitting the encrypted signal. Silence stretched. Then, access granted. A collective breath was released. Dax grinned. Would you look at that? They actually think we belong here. Jace didn't celebrate. We're not in yet. Get us to the surface. The ship descended smoothly, slipping into Urak 7's lower atmosphere, where the air shimmered with energy barriers and the ghostly outlines of orbital weapons arrays. Massive industrial structures stretched into the sky, their surfaces sleek and sterile, marked only by Krax Dominion insignias. The landing zone came into view, a heavily secured platform surrounded by turrets and patrolling sentries. Jace's stomach tightened. They weren't sneaking in unnoticed. Dax let out a low whistle. I hate this place already. Rinka checked her weapons. Stay focused. The ship touched down with a soft thud, hydraulic systems hissing. No turning back now. A metallic voice crackled over the comms. Landing party, state your business. Jace didn't hesitate. Cargo transfer. Authorization packet transmitted. A pause. Acknowledged. Remain on standby for inspection. The three exchanged glances. That wasn't in the plan. Dax leaned forward, whispering. So, what's the play? Jace's mind raced. He had expected checkpoints, guards, and maybe even a standard scan. But a full inspection? That meant they had minutes at best before someone realized they weren't on the official manifest. We improvise, he said, already unstrapping his toolkit. The ramp lowered, revealing a squad of armored Krax enforcers waiting outside. Their glowing red visors swept over the ship like predatory eyes. Jace stepped forward, flanked by Rinka, keeping his expression neutral. The lead officer stepped up, towering over him. Identification. Jace held up his forged credentials, heart hammering in his chest. The officer scanned it, his helmet flickering with data streams. Then, something changed. A tilt of the head. A pause was just a second too long. Jace saw it before the officer even reached for his weapon. Move! He barked. Before the Krax could react, Jace grabbed the nearest fuel canister, yanked open the pressure valve, and hurled it into the squad. The explosion wasn't hurt, but it sent the guards staggering back, their shields flickering. Rinka was already moving, her plasma daggers flashing as she cut through the nearest enforcer. Dax fired a stun round in a second, sending the guard crashing to the floor. Jace lunged for the control panel by the dock entrance, overriding the security lock. The heavy doors groaned open, revealing the interior of Urak 7's research facility, a labyrinth of metal corridors, dimly lit and humming with energy. Go! 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 They sprinted inside as alarms shrieked across the base, red emergency lights flashing. Footsteps thundered in the distance, reinforcements. They had minutes, Jace pulled up the blueprints, scanning for the research archive. If the Nemesis project was real, this was where they'd find the evidence.
This way!
They tore through the corridors, past rows of sealed labs and glass windows revealing ominous-looking containment units filled with flickering energy fields. Whatever they were experimenting on here, it wasn't just weapons. Then, at the end of the hall, a reinforced vault door loomed. Rinka covered the hallway. "Can you get it open?" Jace didn't answer. He was already pulling wires. Bypassing the encryption manually, the system fought back, layers upon layers of security. But his fingers worked with methodical precision. Then click. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the research archive was cold, sterile, and disturbingly empty. A single console flickered at the center. Jace approached, inserting the data spike. Files flashed across the screen, scrolling faster than he could read. But as the system decrypted, his stomach turned to ice. A biological modification program designed to subtly alter genetic code across generations. Jace ran cold. Rinka read over his shoulder, her jaw tightening. They're playing God. Footsteps pounded outside. The Cracks was coming. Dax said, "We need to move. Now." Jace pulled the entire data archive onto the spike. But before they could move, the vault doors slammed shut, and a figure stepped through the far entrance. "It is Targan Kraxhar." He moved with calm certainty, his black armor gleaming under the cold white lights, his mandibles curled in something akin to amusement. "You should have stayed in the shadows." Haze. Jace didn't move, didn't blink. "I get that a lot." Kraxhar tilted his head. "Did you really think you could just walk into my facility, steal my secrets, and leave?" Jace smirked, but there was no humor in his eyes. "No, I planned to run." Then, he fired a concealed pulse charge directly into the overhead power relay. The lights exploded. Everything went black. For a split second, the only thing in the room was the sound of energy crackling, of Kraxhar cursing, of Jace grabbing Rinka's wrist and yanking her toward the emergency hatch he had spotted earlier. They dove through the exit, crashing onto a maintenance platform suspended over the facility's underground reactor. Alarms blared. The base was going into lockdown. Dax skidded to a stop. "Jace, tell me you have a way out." Jace glanced up, grinning despite the chaos. "Oh yeah." Then he pulled a remote detonator from his belt. Kraxhar stepped into view behind them, his weapon raised, ready to fire. But Jace just winked and pressed the button. The shockwave tore through the facility, knocking everyone off balance. Smoke and fire erupted through the lower levels as secondary power cells detonated in a chain reaction. The last thing Jace saw before leaping was Kraxhar's expression twisting into pure rage. The wind howled through the collapsing structure. The reactor's shockwave had them into freefall, and for a split second, there was only the weightlessness of impending. Then impact. Jace hit hard, rolling as the catwalk beneath him buckled from the explosion above. A groan of metal filled the air, the structure tilting dangerously. Pain screamed through his ribs, but he had no time for that. Rinka landed beside him, her breathing ragged, eyes blazing with adrenaline. She pushed herself up first, scanning for an escape, then hauled Jace to his feet. Somewhere above, Kraxhar's voice roared through the facility, ordering his men to secure the vault. They had seconds. Jace staggered but moved, forcing his aching body forward as they sprinted toward the lower maintenance bay. The emergency lights flickered wildly, casting long, erratic shadows through the narrow corridors. Dax was ahead, already overriding a security panel. "Tell me you got a way out," Jace coughed, his throat raw from the smoke. Dax didn't look up, his cybernetic eye flickering as he worked.
"The Valkyrie's autopilot is en route.
But if we don't make it to the extraction point, it's flying home without us." The door hissed open just as the shock troopers breached the upper levels. No time to hesitate. Jace grabbed Rinka's wrist and ran, his boots pounding against the grated flooring. The maintenance tunnels curved downward, leading to the exterior docking ring, a narrow, exposed platform that overlooked the planet's turbulent atmosphere. The moment they burst onto the platform, Jace felt the full force of Orak 7's violent winds, a sheer drop stretching miles below into the swirling storms. Above them, the Valkyrie roared through the sky, its thrusters flaring as it swooped toward their location. Come on, Dax muttered under his breath, activating the ship's drop harness. A set of grappling tethers deployed, swinging down toward them in a controlled arc. Then, The doors behind them exploded. Kraxhar emerged through the smoke, his red eyes glowing with fury. Its hum was barely audible over the howling wind. His remaining troops flanked him, weapons raised.
This ends here.
Haze, Kraxhar snarled. Jace turned slowly, exhaling as he took in the scene. The bridge, the wind, the incoming ship, the drop behind them, the blade in Kraxhar's hand. Rinka reached for her weapon, but Jace stopped her with a small shake of his head. He stepped forward. Dax hissed.
Jace, what the hell are you doing?
Jace just smiled, locking eyes with Kraxhar.
You're right,
he said, voice steady.
This does end here.
Then he moved. Kraxhar lunged, his weapon through the air.
But Jace ducked, not to avoid the strike,
but to grab the edge of a loose power conduit. With a sharp twist, he ripped the exposed cable free, its severed end crackling with raw energy. Then he counterattacks into Kraxhar's armor. His roar of rage twisted into something almost like shock, not at the pain, but at the sheer audacity of what Jace had just done. Then Jace grabbed both Kraxhar and himself and threw them backward off the platform. The world became a blur of wind and metal and falling. Jace felt his stomach lurch, the endless drop pulling him toward oblivion. A second later, Rinka and Dax were yanked up alongside him, their bodies swinging wildly as the Valkyrie accelerated, pulling them to safety. Jace barely had time to register the moment before the entirety of Urak 7 detonated below them. The reactor breach finally reached critical, and in a single brilliant, silent explosion, the facility was no more, taking every trace of the Nemesis project with it. Jace landed hard on the ship's deck as the airlock sealed shut behind them. He sucked in a ragged breath, his body trembling from the adrenaline dump. The hum of the Valkyrie's engines receded into the background as everything hit him at once. The pain, the exhaustion, the fact that they were still alive. A soft chuckle bubbled in his chest, turning into full-blown laughter. Rinka slumped next to him, watching him with an incredulous expression. You're insane. Dax dropped into the pilot's chair, his cybernetic eye flickering as he guided them into the hyperplane, leaving Urak 7 and the Dominion's most horrifying secret far behind. Yeah, Jace admitted, still grinning. But it worked, didn't it? Rinka just shook her head. But for the first time since this entire nightmare began, there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Dax glanced back at them. So what now? Jace pulled the data spike from his pocket, turning it over in his fingers, the only surviving record of what the Krax Dominion had planned. His smile faded. We make sure everyone knows the truth. The Valkyrie streaked into the void, leaving behind the wreckage of Urak 7 as a distant, fading light, and Jace Hayes, the man who shouldn't have survived any of this, leaned back against the bulkhead, already planning the next impossible move.